People come into arts like Taiji, Qigong, Bagua, whatever, for a variety of reasons. Maybe we could say the most common reason is for health purposes. Certainly arts like Taiji and Qigong have been very widespread amongst the more elderly community, or amongst people, become well known for people that are suffering with stress or some kind of condition, and these become forms of sort of healthcare exercise. Maybe that's the biggest group of people that come into these arts. Then you have the people that are interested in martial arts, so more Taiji or Qigong, Taiji or Bagua than Qigong obviously, but a lot of people come into these arts for martial arts purposes. A lot of people who've done other martial arts, maybe they've done karate or something like this, and then they're getting a little bit older and they want to try something softer. And a lot of people come into these arts for that purposes, sort of advancement on their martial path. But there's a third group of people, which is the spiritual practitioners, isn't there? And you could argue that there's a crossover between the three, but there are a lot of people who come into these arts for spiritual purposes. So really I want to look at that. I want to talk about that a little bit, because as with all of these kind of arts, part of the problem or part of the difficulty with getting what people want out of something is, first of all, defining what it is they actually want. And then the second thing is really understanding the pitfalls that prevent you from achieving that thing, There's definitely even a pattern within Eastern arts or Eastern traditions where they talk in the negative, and it's quite funny as a Westerner. You might read some of the writings or hear a spiritual teacher and you think, oh, they're so pessimistic, so negative. But it's actually, the reason for it is it provides a higher degree of clarity. So they will say, this is not it, this is not it, this is not it, but they won't tell you what something actually is. And I think that if you're looking at using something like Tai Chi or Qigong as a spiritual practice, I think this is actually a wise way to approach it. It's very sort of Sherlock Holmesian, isn't it, where you strip away all of the things that it isn't, and what is left is the correct conclusion. So with regards to using the internal arts as a spiritual practice, something like Tai Chi or Qigong, what we need to understand is what the errors may be that may prevent us from using it as a spiritual practice, right? Because any art like this, it is very easy to make errors. And it's very easy to run with those errors because we don't have a clear idea that this thing we are doing is preventing us getting us what we want. So let's look at this. But first, let's define what we mean by spiritual practice, because spiritual practice is a wide term. To some people, being a vegan is a spiritual practice. Some people collecting crystals is a spiritual practice. Some people going on a tantric sex workshop is spiritual, or reading quotes by famous people is spiritual. Like the definition is very, very big. Oh, of course, the religion's going to church or something, But I would say, I think in order to define something, first we need to be really pedantic. So I want to split hairs a little bit on that term, and it's going to make me come across as a bit of a term fascist, a word fascist, but I apologize, but I'm just trying to be really sort of honed in on what we actually mean by spiritual practice. Because I think a lot of things that people call spiritual practice, if we're being pedantic, are actually spiritually adjacent, shall we say, rather than spiritual practice proper. Because spiritual practice means, to me at least, to do with or concerning spirit. That's it. It is attempting to work with or discover or unify with or move into a state of, whatever, rediscover spirit. That's what it is. If it is not working with spirit, it is not a spiritual practice. Okay? But when I say spirit, I don't mean spirits as in ghosts. I don't mean that. I mean spirit as in the divine, what the Chinese might call Shen, right? That kind of spirit. Now, what Shen is, what spirit is harder to define and a different subject altogether. But we can definitely point to what it's not, right? And if a practice is involved with or leading to something that is not spirit, then can we call it a spiritual practice? I would say no. So for example, if something is working with the body, is it a spiritual practice? No, because body is not spirit. If something is working with the mind or psychology, is it a spiritual practice? No, because the mind and the psychology are not spirit, right? You know that saying, all is mind, that I don't know where it came from, Hermetics thing, maybe, not sure. It's true, but we're trying to find the thing that is not all. The spirit is not all. The spirit is a thing that is outside of or before all came into existence. So mind is not spirit. So if it's working with the mind or working with psychology, it's not spiritual. If it is working with energy, chi, prana, is it spiritual? No, because energy or chi is not spirit. So does that mean that all of the things we do, such as yoga, qigong, taiji, are they not spiritual practices? Well, in this sort of overly fascistic approach to the term, I would argue that no, they're not spiritual practices. They're spiritually adjacent practices, right? Now again, splitting hairs, does it matter? Only really if we're looking to define something to make it useful. So I'll explain why in a bit, but I'm not saying that working with a body or working with a mind or working with psychology or working with energy or any of these things, or working with ritual or ceremony, if that's your thing, I'm not saying any of these things are pointless, definitely not. I'm just saying they're not spiritual practices because they don't touch spirit. They are spiritually adjacent. You can think of them as being like the practices that build the ladder, if you want, that you climb up to find spirit. Okay, so this is why I say it's splitting hairs. Because if I'm using Taiji as a spiritual practice, actually really it's a spiritually adjacent practice, because largely I'm working with the mind and I'm working with the body and I'm working with the energy, same in Qigong. Maybe, at the very, very upper echelons of the highest ever aspect of that art, maybe it becomes a spiritual practice. But if I am doing something, this is where the problem comes in. If I'm doing something, you can't find spirit, right? Spirit is not found by doing something. Spirit is found when you stop doing something, right? That is kind of what has been pointed to by many spiritual teachers. So, and okay, within that term spirit, maybe you could put soul if you want. If you want to find your soul, or you want to find a connection to God or the divine or spirit, any of these things that are not actually the same thing, but they're all sort of stratifications of gradients of things that exist outside of the normal conventional sense faculties, something further back, something we might call spiritual. So within spiritual, I would also include the soul, So if I can't find any of those things by doing something, that means that any practice I do is not really spiritual, right? It's not a spiritual practice. So meditation is to find a connection, to a unification with spirit, maybe. Maybe Buddhists would have another term or something like that. But of course, you know what I mean. I'm pointing to something divine or something higher, something awakened. Or maybe there are versions of meditation, well, there certainly are, or religion that are aiming to find the soul, okay, so that the soul can reunite with spirit. Sure, these are all valid things. But you see, there is no such thing as a meditation method that leads to that. No amount of following your breath, no amount of moving your energy, no amount of anchoring your mind onto an object, no amount of observer and observed working together, no amount of running mala beads through your hands or any of those things are going to lead to spirit. And I'll tell you why. Because they're all based on methods. They're all doing something. If you're observing your breath, you are doing something. If you are doing fire breathing, you are doing something. If you are compressing whatever the body, you are doing something, right? Even if you're just focused on an object, you are doing something, a mental object or a physical object, it doesn't matter. These are all actions. And actions are already going to lead to a form of something that is manifest. And if you understand sort of esoteric or Eastern thought, if it is manifest, then it is already not spirit, not soul. It is something else. It is something in the mind, something in the psychology, something in the energy, something in the subtle realm. But it is already spirit consolidated down into something, right? So does that mean you shouldn't do any of these methods? No, definitely not. The reason is because to find or to change energy or to change mind or to change body are based on a method, okay, a technique. So I do a technique to change these things, right? Well, on a simple level, I want to get bigger, I go to the gym or eat. Those are techniques, you know. If I want to become more focused, I can concentrate on a point inside my mind or whatever, and then that is a method. You are doing something. But spirit, or the divine, or union, or any of the terms you want to put on it, can only be found through qualities, not through a technique. You understand? Through qualities. Now, qualities and techniques are kind of a clash, because as soon as I do something, in many ways, my innate qualities are not there anymore, because I have moved into action. And it's only when I'm doing nothing, I am wu wei, if you like, I am non-doing, then whatever qualities are there will appear within my being, within me, you know. So the spiritually adjacent practices that I'm talking about, such as Qigong, yoga, martial arts, Tai Chi, right? What they are doing is using techniques, doing things to train the qualities, right? Meditation the same. They are training the mental qualities, training the energetic or the subtle qualities, training the physical qualities, so that when those qualities are there, when I simply sit and do nothing, don't apply any more techniques, don't apply any more actions, then whatever innate qualities are there, they will arise, okay? Spirit is only found, Shen is only found, if you want to stick within Qigong terms, or the soul is only found, if we're looking at more religious context maybe, or something like this, is only found when the actions stop, the techniques stop, and you simply reside in whatever innate qualities are there, okay? So how do I enter into union with spirit? I sit there and do nothing. Close your eyes and breathe. I go like that. Okay, once I do this, all of my innate qualities are here. They're like a series of tuning forks that maybe synchronize in such a way that I align with spirit, or I do not. And if I sit and I breathe and the qualities are not there, then I will not unite with spirit. So then what I do is I go back to my method. Maybe I breathe more, I focus more, I live my life in a different way, I act in a more moral fashion, I reshape my conceptual understanding, I build my energy, I move my body, whatever it is to build my qualities, so that then when I sit and I do nothing, I allow the qualities to be there, I will either unite with spirit or not. Now, the rule is, if you are doing something, even in something like meditation, if there is a method, all you will find is mind, okay? Because mind, the construction of your mental faculties, is an action that arises out of spirit or arises out of nothingness. It is the Taiji and the yin yang that comes from Wuji. So if I'm using a method or an action, that's all I will find. I will find mind. And maybe that mind will trick me, because my desire to achieve something may cause me to get some image or some deity or some light or something generated in my head to trick me into thinking that I've found spirit. But if what I've been doing is still based on a method, I focused here, or I moved this energy through here, or I made this special shape with my hands, and, you know, like, if I am using those methods and then an outcome arises as a result of the method, then it's not really spirit, it's actually mind. It's still something generated in the realm of manifestation of you, because it's not based on wu wei, non-doing, okay? So, excuse me, itchy nose. So I know that, again, you know, yeah, splitting hairs, I'm aware. It's super pedantic. But the reason I'm defining it this way is so that hopefully it can help you in your practice, or at least from my experience or my opinion, what helps you, you know. Like I always tell people that I'm teaching, if you're interested in the spiritual side of the arts, the most important part of your practice is the bit you do afterwards, when you just sit and do nothing. You know, you've just done 2 hours of Qigong, just done an hour of Tai Chi, I don't know, whatever it is you've done some yoga. You finish. When you do nothing, that is the spiritual practice part. That is the part where you are seeing if the tuning fork qualities will align with spirit. All of the other bit, when you are going through your exercises, through your asanas, through your pranayama, through your Taiji form, through your exercises to build Qi and develop the Dantian, all of that side of it is still doing. It is not wu wei. You are still trying to govern. You are still trying to control. So all you will find is body energy or spirit. You know, like body energy or mind. Sorry. Body energy or mind is all you will find, you know. And again, nothing wrong with that. You need to find the qualities, because most people couldn't simply, right from the beginning, just sit and enter into spirit. because all the correct qualities are not there. So you need something to train the spirit. So the most important part of any class, if you're interested in spiritual work, is the sitting and doing nothing at the end. But also, more important than that, is all the bits you do beforehand, because they're the bits that are trying to change the qualities to build more energy, or to silence the mind, or to build more concentration, or to open the channels, or whatever you're doing. Trying to reconfigure all of those qualities so that when you sit, there is either fruition to your practice or not, you know. And these things like I'm talking about, again, only my experience, only my opinion. That's all I can share on these podcasts. You know, like maybe you're driving and listening to this and I'm just trying to share my thoughts. But in my personal opinion, and I'm not guaranteeing I'm 100% right, but whenever I see people teaching or talking of methods that lead to Gong, methods that lead to the divine, methods that lead to union, methods that lead to awakening or the soul or something like this, I don't believe them. I don't believe them. I think there's a misunderstanding. I think there's a misconception, because certainly from the traditions I come in from, that spirit or the divine or something deeper or the true being or any of these things that exist before mind, deeper than you, the layers of heaven, whatever it is, anything that sits behind manifestation is only found through release, letting go, wu wei, none governing, none doing. So if I bang the gong and draw the yantra, step in a circle, in the case of Bagua, you know, or build here, build the dantian, I don't expect that to lead to a direct unification or connection with anything divine. I just don't. Because those are actions that are building qualities. See, they're techniques. Techniques cannot lead to this thing because they're not based on letting go. And I think if people understand this, I wish I'd understood this earlier, I'll be honest. If I understood this earlier on in my arts, I would have saved myself a lot of delusion from, you know, very heightened spiritual experiences. If you're listening to this as a podcast, I try not to do movements or hand mannerisms. I know a lot of you just listen to the audio, but I did air quotes around spiritual experience there, you know. Like when I was younger and I had many spiritual experiences, air quotes, it's because I didn't understand this, and I was just trusting what I was taught and what I was reading, you know, not to blame others. You know, everybody was doing their best, but I was using methods to try to do it. If I circulate the energy through here and I get it to go up through the shushumna and I breathe this way and I build this one change, I concentrate on this point, I will enter into a connection with the divine and I will discover what spiritual practice truly is. But what I actually got was lights in the head or feeling of energy moving or something like this, like somatic or visual experiences that are, the Buddhists would call near enemies, you know, that weren't actually a connection with spirit. Just, I mean, my teacher, my own teacher that I train with at the moment, I mean, he is very anti-experiences, you know, and I don't want to butcher his teachings or put words in his mouth, you know, but when he started teaching me, he used to talk about don't have experiences, don't focus on experiences. And I started to, you know, think about this quite deeply and realize, because even though when he said it, I mean, it sounded kind of obvious, but then I thought about it, I'm like, actually it's not. Like a lot of what I've done over the years is based upon this idea of having experience or value in experience. And as he would point out to me quite rightly, an experience is something that is already gone, it's in the past. And also, not that he would say this, but my own view of it, you know, is that experiences are also just based in some kind of somatic, sensory kind of thing as well, which is not actually what you want, because it's still, it's still the mind, it's still the manifest. It's what the Tao Te Ching would call the named, the worded, you know, that which can be named is not the true Tao, you know, I paraphrase that line there, but the implication being that if it can be consolidated into a sensory experience, what they call the named or the words, then it's not the real thing. You know, the Tao Te Ching is not saying you can't speak about spiritual stuff. It's not what it's saying. That's a misunderstanding of that line. It's saying that once it's consolidated or defined into an experience or a thought or something that exists at the level of psychology, it's not the real thing. Because spirit kind of involutes down into the manifest realm, and we're trying to get beyond this, return to the source, reverse the course, as they say in Taoist alchemy. And that can't be done with a technique or a method. So this kind of brings me to an interesting sort of conundrum, like that means that if you can't use a technique or a method to locate spirit, which I don't think you can, or connect with spiritual practice proper, it means that you can't strive, right? And this, of course, is what every single spiritual saint or monk or guru or Rinpoche or whatever is written. Don't they say, don't strive, don't aim for stuff? Striving in itself produces a form of attachment or dissatisfaction if you don't achieve it, and striving becomes a block on your progress. But of course, you have to strive. You might strive to different degrees. You might mildly try, a half-assed effort, or you might strive your ass off, but you have to strive to a certain extent. So then I sat with this conundrum many times as well. So then I kind of looked at what I was doing, and I've looked at what other people are doing around me over the years, peers and stuff like that, and not to criticize them. Everybody has their own way of doing things, but I reached the conclusion that people were striving while pretending to not strive. So they would, every day I do my practice, but I'm not striving. I'm not trying, it's just natural, it's just something I do. And I guess I bought into that lie for a while too. So then I was like, well, I'm not striving, but I'm still doing hours and hours and hours. So there must be some kind of striving behind it. So then you think, well, maybe there's a way around it, or maybe it's not that literal. But all of these things in the teaching are as literal as they sound. They are as literal as they sound. So they mean don't strive. So then I realized my personal striving of a practice is actually more like a background quality. I'll tell you why. Because maybe, I might be striving or trying really hard to get good at Tai Chi. Certainly in the past I was more interested in that. Or maybe I was striving really hard to get good at Bagua. Striving really hard to get good at Chinese medicine. Striving really hard to get good at Qigong. Whatever it is. And I can feel like at different periods of my life it switched. So in the past it was very much about martial arts. These days not, actually. Qigong is my main love. I don't see myself as a martial artist any more particularly. I teach martial arts. I even run a full-time martial arts school. That's funny, isn't it? I teach a martial arts school. I spend hours and hours every day teaching martial arts, but I don't view myself as a martial artist. I'm teaching it, and I still enjoy it, but actually my love, my striving, I guess, is for Qigong and Neigong. So you see, there's been different phases, and there was periods of my time where I really was striving to understand Chinese medicine to the deepest level I possibly could. And because those phases came and went, I started to realize it's not the art I'm striving for striving's sake. Striving is a background quality to the mind. It's me. Like, it's a background thing. Because then I put it out into the rest of my life, and I'm thinking, wow, when I'm involved in business, that I'm striving to do well at business. And when I'm out with friends, I'm striving to make sure I can be the most positive experience for them, or I'm looking after somebody, I'm striving to do I just realize striving is not an art, it's a quality in the background. As soon as I realize, oh, it doesn't matter what I strive for. So therefore, if I wish to find spirit, find the divine, reverse the course, whatever, I'm giving you all these options. Whatever term you have for the unmanifest level of these arts, for spiritual practice. But then I can't strive for it, but I have to strive for something. Because striving is a background quality. So that part of my mind that's striving has to be satisfied. Because I don't think you'll ever unstrive. You can't remove it from your life completely. I've never met anyone who has. I do know lots of people I've met who say they have, but that's not true. Like, I've known deep meditators who say, I'm above striving. It's not true. It's not true. There is always something there that they're striving or working towards. So therefore, you have to throw your striving, whatever level it is, your desire to get good at something, into an art. So for me, it's Qigong. In the past, it was Taiji, whatever it is. Actually, these days, I'm striving to be the best teacher I possibly can. So that's a big facet of it, and striving to be a good a boon to my community or something like that. That's where my striving goes. Therefore, my striving can be satisfied by something. It can be satisfied by an action, satisfied by my Qigong. I've done my striving for the day. And that's fine, because you see that the Qigong that I'm striving for is still based on a technique. And if it's based on a technique, then it's still only training spiritually adjacent qualities, right? You see? So then when I've done my striving, that part of my mind is satisfied. I've given the monkey a banana, I believe is one of the phrases for it they use in Chinese arts. So then what happens, I can just sit and not strive. Not strive. I just sit. Okay? How long do you sit? Doesn't matter, because if I have a number on it, you see, that becomes a form of striving. So people are like, I will sit for 1 hour. I will sit for 90 minutes. I will sit for, people like numbers, 108 minutes, 144 minutes, whatever, you know. Or they will say, I will sit for 20 minutes, maybe. Maybe they're more realistic if they're very new at something. You see, but that's already kind of striving, right? So for me, I will just, after I finish, then I will just sit and do nothing. How long do I sit? I don't care. Sometimes it's a very long time. Sometimes it's not so long at all. But I don't have any kind of rule around it. I just sit and do nothing. I don't strive now, because I've done the striving. I've piled that into my other practice, my art forms, my Qigong, my Taiji, whatever. Now I sit, and if the qualities are there, the tuning forks are as they should be, the guitar strings are at the right level of tightness, you know, whatever analogy you use, I've heard people use all different ones, then your mind, your attention, your awareness might get drawn into something that we call spiritual practice, right? Now I believe, after all these years, my conclusions I've come to, and what have been pointed to by people far more skillful than I, you know, not to take away from their input at all, ever grateful for it. But the conclusion I've come to is that is the only way to engage in spiritual practice. So the only spiritual practice is there is no spiritual practice, which sounds like a Zen koan or sort of contradiction in its own right, doesn't it? And everything else you're doing that is a method or is a technique is only striving a technique that is working towards building those qualities, right? So once you've come to that conclusion, the argument would be, well, why don't you just sit and do nothing and close your eyes and breathe? I'll tell you why. Well, some people do, you know, they just think you sit and do nothing. Well, firstly, because the qualities are not there. Because the sitting and doing nothing will not build qualities, because there's no technique. All it does is enable those qualities to express themselves. So you will need a method or a technique. So you still have to have the other side of your training, whether it's a meditation technique or a breathwork technique or yoga or martial arts or Qigong or Tai Chi, whatever. The other side of it is, I think if you sit there and try to do nothing, 99.99999 going on, % of human beings, a degree of striving will arise within them. Like, I actually think that that desire to strive or to do, to cause an action, wei, not wu wei, you know, to try to contrive, if you like, that tendency towards that is so strong within us that I actually believe that that is the source of a lot of the thoughts that arise when you sit. People sometimes think it's your shadows or your trauma or it's discomfort or something. Maybe for some, but I think a lot of actually what comes up is a desire to strive, because I'm sat there doing nothing and my mind doesn't like it, because I'm human and humans like to achieve, and we're more goal orientated than we allow ourselves to think in the spiritual community. Outside the spiritual community, they tell everybody you must be competitive, you must be goal orientated or whatever, right? In the spiritual community, you must never strive, you must never be goal orientated. Well, are we completely different humans? Are we a different species? Do people in the spiritual arts all have no goals, and people outside of the spiritual paths all have goals? I don't think so. That's not what I've seen. I've seen some of the most driven, dare I say, almost unhealthily obsessed people on a goal in the Qigong or Neigong world especially. There's millions of them striving for superpowers so they can be the founding member of the X-Men or something like this in real life, which is a form of striving. So clearly there's a goal-oriented nature at it, and I've seen, you know, meditators that want to change the world, and they're like, I want to make a big difference. We're going to build a big foundation, go on stage everywhere and tell people of the benefits of meditation and how we can transform the life. That's a goal. That's striving, right? So therefore that person is not above striving. So therefore spiritual people aren't above striving or goal-orientated practice. They aren't. They're still human. So that's why you can't sit and do nothing, because that part of your nature needs satisfying. So you have to give it something that it can get good at. And everybody will have different things. Maybe it's music, maybe it's art, like literal art, painting and dancing or something, who knows? But for me, for me it's Tai Chi and Qigong, like amongst other things. I don't see Qigong as the thing that's going to lead me to unification with the divine. I just don't. I don't see Tai Chi as a thing that's going to lead me to unification with the divine. I don't see either of them as a direct spiritual practice any more than I think sitting in a temple in Bhutan and chanting while visualizing a deity as a spiritual practice. They're all on a level with each other. They are, at best, spiritually adjacent. They are art forms, expressions of the manifest, expressions of me once I am involuted down from the spiritual realm into something manifest. Fuck me, that was a hippie-ish sentence, wasn't it? But you know what I mean? Me, right. So then when I do these arts, there's an expression of the manifest. The technique is changing the qualities of the manifest, but not finding the divine, which means it's absolutely no problem for me to strive in it. I can be goal-orientated. I want to be better at my Tai Chi form. I want my Tuisho, my push hands, to be better. I want my body to have more Qi and this channel to open. I want to learn this new exercise. I want my body to be strong and healthy. I want my mind to be focused. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The striving is piled into that art. And then afterwards, I sit and I do nothing. And do you know what? As a naturally quite driven person, I am. Like if I had a normal job, I worked in an office or something like this, banking, I'd be a complete workaholic, but not because I'm greedy for finances or anything like this, but I'd be a workaholic because I'm a very driven person. So whatever I do, my natural inclination is to see how much better I can get at this thing. I think I've told some of you before on here that at one time in the past I was worried. I was like, oh, I'm far too driven. It's too good. I need to get something I can relax on. So I'll play music. So I got a guitar because I thought that'd be chilled. And then I just ended up throwing that striving into the guitar. So it was like this chord has to be played 10,000 times until it's perfect. It just became a new martial art technique. And then this scale must be played over and over again until it is completely... It's like, and I started to realize, no, this is not a form of relaxation. This is another form of striving. I can't half-ass anything. It's not my way. So the guitar went out the window because there's literally no point. I may as well just carry on in martial arts because my character is not changing. But I also realized, well, the striving is no problem because the striving can make the technique as good as possible. So then my Tai Chi and my Qigong, if we take those two as an example, I do other stuff too, but if we take those ones, I work on making them as beautiful as I possibly can, right? And maybe not purely aesthetic, but beauty with regards to energy and beauty with regards to the technique. Always trying to refine, move towards these very high-minded ideals, the Zhongding and Huajin of Tai Chi, the filling and the opening of the channels in the body in Qigong, and high-level skills within Chinese medicine. I sort of strive for those things. Because they're not, you see, they're not actually a spiritual practice. They're spiritually adjacent. They're the mind, they're the body, they're the energy. So then when I've satisfied that part of my nature, you know what happens when I sit? If I've already practiced some of my art, very little arises in my mind. It goes very, very quiet. Very, very quiet. Very, very still. Okay, naturally. Because I believe that a lot of the movements, the distractions, the distortions that arise in you come from the side of your nature that likes to strive. Now, as the years have gone on with this realization, I guess, and I mean a spiritual realization, but a technical one, rightly or wrongly, it's the model I work to. What I've realized is actually the amount of time I have to spend in the striving phase is less than the time I can spend in Wu Wei. So initially I might have had to do, I had to do 2 hours of Tai Chi getting as good as I can. Here's a spear, sword, build some Qi in the Qigong, okay, get skillful. And then I could sit and I'd probably get like 5-10 minutes of peaceful stillness until the striving comes back and there's all the mind, you know. But then as time has gone on, now half hour of Tai Chi or Qigong, just moving the energy around and moving my body, not that I only do that little practice, but even that is enough to then sit, and I might get a couple of hours where that part of my nature is just satisfied and I can sit in non-striving, you see. So then what I am doing in the non-striving phase, the spirit is the spiritual practice, okay? Is it successful? Well, that's debatable. I've had touches of it, but I would never claim expertise. I think it's worrying when so many people so easily claim expertise of spiritual levels of training. But, that's me. But it's definitely easier to understand now when I sit that spiritual practice is the method of no method. Spiritual practice is the practice of no striving. There is nothing. There is no striving, there is no method. There is just sit. And then the calibration of the qualities that I have built through my goal-orientated expressive arts are either there or they're not, And this kind of mindset is what I've carried across to lots of my teaching and lots of my practice. And again, only my experience, but it's what I want to share. So it's just started to rain quite hard because it's, supposed to be rainy season, but Bali is a weird one. The weather keeps changing all over the place. Some people say climate change. Other people probably more accurately say geoengineering, whatever it is. But yeah, hopefully the rain won't drown out the sound. So I'll keep going for a bit, but if it gets too stormy or whatever, I'll stop. Yeah, so I'll try. Hope the sound is okay. So with what I've been explaining here, this realization is what enabled me to, at least from where I am at the moment, understand many of the things that the old teachers would talk about, or even the current teachers, the people I've trained with, who would talk of this no striving, no method, no doing, just release into spirit, as if that's like an easy thing to do. But of course, the more that you do the method, the far technique, not far as an issue, far as in technique, right, into your body, so that all the qualities are there, qualities of the mind, train the body, train the energy, that when you sit in the gong or quality, then hopefully these things will arise, and then all of the wu wei and everything can be there, right? And I see, before I move on as well, I just want to clarify, I say meditation is the same as well, right? So meditation, what I mean is by the technique. So whether you're following the breath or visualizing something or looking at a point or doing a ceremony or ritual or holding a mudra or whatever it is you're doing, chanting, om, whatever, all of these are still techniques and methods. So they are, again, spiritually adjacent practices if you want, okay? I'm going to call this episode Splitting Hairs, I think, because obviously I'm aware that is a horribly anally retentive use of the term, but, you get what I mean, hopefully, yeah. It's only when you sit and do nothing that arises. I mean, that's the story, isn't it? You hear these people that strive for years and years and years. I've read of several of them, and they're like, I went to the Himalayas and I practiced hard with this guru. Then I went over to India and did some austerity and probably had food poisoning a lot. And then I went over to Thailand and I lived in the temple and the monastery, all these different things. And eventually I realized it was a total waste of time, so I gave up and went home. And halfway home, once I gave up, enlightenment struck me. Because what happens? It struck them because they weren't doing anything. They finally gave up and stopped with all the methods, and then boom, then they have their spiritual awakening, The problem is sometimes I think that people have misunderstood that, so then they try to teach straight from that place of no striving. So then they say, well, I did all the methods and they didn't work, so now I gave up and then it came, so therefore you should just give up and do nothing and it will come. And of course it doesn't ever come for any of those people, because they haven't realized that the striving has to come first. I have to do the techniques and I have to do the method to change the qualities of the person, because it's only the correct person that gives up and releases into nothingness that has all the qualities aligned that bring the experience. It's not going to happen for people who don't have those qualities in place. This to me is why there must be doing before there is none doing. So then there's a couple of, this is me defining what I mean by spiritual practice, but then I want to look, like I said, at the errors that can prevent you from doing this or finding spirit. I would say that one of the errors, in my opinion, and that's all I'm sharing with you, is to mistakenly put the striving into the attempt to find spirit, rather than putting the striving into the causative qualities and then non-striving when you're trying to unify with spirit. You can't even try to unify with spirit, that is striving, but you know what I mean. I think that is one error, to not separate, compartmentalize those different approaches to the training. I think that's one. Another error is even the approach you have to the goal-orientated side of the training, right? Which is, I've taught, excuse me, belching, fizzy water. Yeah, bubbles are very strong in this one. I've taught a lot of people. I've taught a lot of people. I've taught some people for a long time, other people in and out. Like as with all schools. I've taught for over 20 years, and my courses are big. There's a lot of people coming through the school, so I've met a lot of people. This morning I taught my small daily class this morning was 70, 60 people. So I see a lot of people all the time, and what I see is that everybody engages with the practice to varying degrees. The ones who I worry about the most, the ones I know that will not get what they want for it, are the ones that approach with the worst mindset, which is obsession, right? Obsession. And I mean in the very literal sense, because in the past I've used, probably even in podcasts I've said obsession can be healthy, but I kind of mean it like colloquially or kind of jokingly. But if I'm talking literally about obsession, then actually it's a negative quality, because obsession is a form of like attachment or driving around a discomfort in the mind. I think that's where obsession comes from. And a lot of the time with spiritual practice, obsession can be extra problematic, because obsession can be usually because of some kind of pain, right? And the reason I say this is because people are hearing about spirit or the divine, and they're hearing about, like concepts like reincarnation, or the Buddhists might say we free ourselves from the reincarnation, from samsara, to go to the heaven realm. Same as a Christian saying we go to the better place, unless you're bad and you go to the worst place. Well, they talk about this freedom, liberation from the cycle. Now, whatever terms you put upon it, generally the place of spirit or the divine sounds better, shinier, brighter, more fun, like whatever. It's a divine place, closer to God. Now, to the average person, they hear that and they go, that's kind of cool. That's it. Interesting concept. And then they explore it. But to the person that has a lot of pain, and I think that's often what it is, some psychological pain on the inside, they hear that and it becomes an object of obsession. Basically, it becomes the thing that's going to save them, to liberate from the hellish world that they live within. It becomes like an extreme form of medicine, the only medicine that can save them from the extreme suffering that they're going through in their life. Now, you might think I'm being overly dramatic. And I think I am, but I also think the obsessives are being overly dramatic too. And it's definitely a reality. Having taught a lot of people, I've seen it, okay, this obsession arising in people. With those people, if I ever sort of spend time talking to them, the first thing I try to get them to understand is there's nothing wrong with life. That's the first thing. And the reason for this is because most people that I'm teaching are not coming from some really awful place. I'm not teaching people from some terrible war zone. I'm not teaching people that are dying in a famine. I'm teaching people that essentially that have, I don't want to use a woke liberal word, but privilege, if you like. I feel dirty even saying that because I don't agree with such concepts. But they have the privileged circumstances where they have the time and the resources to come and study, especially because a lot of the stuff I'm doing, and they normally have to come all the way across the bloody planet in order to train with me, maybe these days online, but people are usually traveling to come and see me, so they already have the sort of freedom to move around that a lot of people in the world don't do. And I know that, and I'm not taken away from the pain that somebody might felt from some deep childhood trauma or some hurt or pain that's been there, or something terrible someone's done to them, or someone they've lost or something, because life is fairly painful sometimes for most of us at different stages, and also to varying degrees. But you're not in a war zone. You're not in a famine. You're not, you're not in hell. You're in a world that is ultimately quite beautiful. Like here in Bali, I've had people that have that obsession. They have to get away from the pain. And sometimes I have to remind them, you live in Bali. Like there's a lot of traffic and smog here. And right now people are slagging Bali off. They're going, oh, Bali, it's a corporate tourist busy place. Sure, if you're in the middle of town. Like if you're in the middle of the town. I'll go off on a tangent here. I get annoyed by all these people who come here and they go, oh, it's so touristy. Yes, because you're in the tourist town. Have you considered getting on a motorbike and driving 5 minutes north outside of the tourist area? And guess what? It's absolutely beautiful. It's still a picturesque and pristine place with amazing landscapes and vistas. Everywhere you look is beauty, natural beauty. The temples are amazing, the scenery is awesome. Everything is beautiful here. The rice paddies, if you've never seen them, this color, the vibrant green, but yet people come here and they don't go to those areas because they can't go too far from Starbucks, but they'll sit in Starbucks and moan about the tourist busy area because they're idiots. But there you go. So, back on topic. So if somebody has that kind of obsession that is built from this deep pain, I've got to escape the samsara, I often tell them the first thing you have to learn to do is enjoy samsara. Okay, and I know that's not a very Buddhist thing because they might say it's a gilded cage or something, but you have to be okay with life. You have to go out, like stop the training, go drive up into the hills, look out over the view, and just remember that life is a beautiful thing. And some awful things may have happened to you that make you uncomfortable, but the world is not this thing that needs escaping from, because that unhealthy mindset, if there's not a peace that is made with the world, with the illusion we live within, if you like, if you want to call it that, if there's not some peace and joy taken from that, then that obsession will never go. That hurt will always be there in the background. This idea of I can escape from this world, and it creates an unhealthy mindset that actually prevents you from ever coming anywhere near spirit. It's a funny thing that a lot of people think that they're motivated to understand the spiritual arts, and actually with a bit of exploration, they're actually only motivated to escape their pain. And they think they want to understand the spiritual arts, but really they just want psychological help. So what happens is they train the art, and maybe they find some way to fix that psychological hurt, or to harmonize it, or essentially to accept and make peace with it so that the pain disappears. And do you know what happens? Most people quit. Most people stop, because they weren't really interested in spirit. They were interested in an escape from the pain. You understand? Or when the pain is not there, they stop. And I've talked to you about this before in other podcasts, I think, like meditators will do it. So they think that escaping the suffering is the goal of the meditation, but it's not. Escaping the suffering is what, the illusion of the suffering is what gets you to the start of the race, if you like, at the start point. You get there. You weren't even at level. You were down here suffering, if you like. It's an overly simple model. And then you were above that, and all of a sudden you're filled with this sense of freedom and comfort and ease. And then you stop. And then mistakenly people think, oh, I have unified with spirit. And what they've actually done is just stopped suffering. They've made peace with things. But that wasn't the goal. That was the start. But the reason you don't realize it's the start is because you never really wanted connection with the divine. You never wanted connection with God. You never wanted the heaven realms. You just wanted to not suffer, which is a totally valid aim. Totally valid aim. You see, but your motive wasn't what you thought it was. And this is what is happening with a lot of the obsessive people, because they have this great discomfort. I've got to escape samsara. So that creates this urgency, this desperation, this need to achieve it. Now the problem is, obsession, I mean, I can only describe it in the sense of what it feels like energetically. Let's go woo-woo for a second. Obsession kind of forms a cage or a ball or like a compression around your intent, around your striving, and locks it there, right? So if, for example, I was saying, if I go back to what I was talking about previously, I'm striving in my Tai Chi, do my Tai Chi, okay, striving in my Qigong, okay, better than that, moving the Qi around. What happens is then that mental tension of the striving will start to disperse because it's satisfied. It's like a hunger that has been fed, right? Now that I'm released from it, I can sit, right? Obsession forms a mental block around that drive, around that goal-orientatedness. So then when I obsessively go into the art, it never frees up. So it just gets more and more and more and more and more and more and more until eventually you only know how to strive, nothing else, right? And you strive and you strive and you strive. You think the more I do, the more I will free myself from this trap, which is mind. But it will not do it, because striving can only lead you to mind. Okay? When you stop striving, as I said, there is something else. You can release into it. But the obsessive person cannot release. They can't. Okay? It's a mental illness that locks you into it. I have seen students do this, and watched them, you know, they won't just do Bagua, they'll do 84 hours of Bagua because to free myself from the pain. That's obsession. You are locking yourself more and more into the delusion of mind. They will do 45 repetitions of the form because they've got to keep going until I can't stand up anymore, because they want to free themselves from the pain, but they can't. They can't free themselves from the pain because they're just locking themselves into mind. They can't find anything beyond mind. They're just anchoring into their psychology more and more and more. And same with Qigong. You know, like I've seen it so much. And I'm not going to say that I'm not free of it myself. You know, this is definitely a trap. Like attracts like. And there is an obsessiveness in me that I've had to learn to temper. And I think that was partly why, you know, you can draw other obsessive people towards you. Now, the problem with striving, obsession, going around and around and around and around and around and around and around like this, is the obsession doesn't just, it's not, like striving is not striving for a thing, it's a background quality. Obsession is a background quality as well. So just like you can become obsessed with a practice, you can become obsessed with an idea, obsessed with a feeling, obsessed with a person. You know, people might start stalking or sending hate mail online or something. It's year after year after year. I definitely have some, I guess the modern, the kids today would call it haters, but I feel too old to use the word haters. But I have some of these people online that have been essentially obsessively hating me for years now. They're literally obsessed with me. Like, they are, and I don't mean that I'm not saying that as some kind of hyperbole. They are literally obsessed with me. I occupy their mind every waking second of their day. They are obsessed. And the internet is full of these people, you know, and I know other teachers, and my friend Adam, and I know other teachers, peers of mine, I guess, heads of other schools that I know. Some of you might not be aware I'm friends with, but I am, who also have this as well, in the same way that actors have it, I'm sure, and celebrities and politicians have it, that people are obsessed with them. And just going around and around and around in this kind of cage they've caught in their psychology, where they will project things and make up things that just aren't true in their own mind and believe it because they're locked inside this delusion. So it's a very extreme form of mental illness. And this is the problem. Whether that obsession was piled into your repetition as a martial art form, or you stop that repetition and then it's there in your background nature and your character, that's what it's going to do. It's going to be there. You will be obsessed over something. It doesn't matter, an idea, a person, an art, a practice, whatever. Lots of people live like this, and I feel sorry for them because that's a terrible place to be, because the other thing that obsession creates is desperation, like a very sad, painful desperation that they can't get out of this obsession, and other people can't help them, and why won't they help them, and they can't get out of it. And that desperation is essentially the suffering, the dissatisfaction that is generated that they never get what they are obsessed over, you know. So if I am obsessed over liberating myself from samsara, so I'm going to meditate for 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day till I collapse. You see, that striving for the goal of samsara, of freedom from samsara, I never get, because obsession only locks me in psychology. So then what happens is a dissatisfaction arises. Now there is dukkha, a desperation, a pain arises in me, because the more I strive, the further I get from my goal. That is the origin of dukkha, and one of the major ones, and one of the problems with obsession is that obsession is extreme driving, so it creates extreme dissatisfaction, which it creates extreme dukkha, and then that dukkha eventually fragments the mind and leads to mental illness, and then people will snap. And the problem with mentally ill people is they don't know that they're mentally ill. Everyone else around you will, but you yourself will not. That is the downside of it. I think worryingly, like if you go on the internet and you look up anything, who cares? It doesn't have to be around these arts. Go to a celebrity's, not that I would do such a thing, it's not really my scene. Go to an actor or a singer's Facebook page or Instagram page or something, scroll down the comments. You'll see comment, emoji, bot, AI voice. The internet's dead, it's all bots now and AI. But somewhere in there, there's someone that will say, oh, I hate you, or something like this. Like, just, you're like, what? Where does that come from? And then you will see The week before, same person. Week before, same person. Week before, same person. Week before. It's gone on for years and years and years and years. And worryingly, if you go back far enough, you see, I love you. Like it's changed. That switch, you see, the obsession that they had for that person, that celebrity, becomes a dissatisfaction that causes the mental illness and all of the pain. Why does this matter? Why am I telling you? Because I think if we're seriously into the arts, we all have a tendency towards it. I've told you the extreme example where you turn into this hate-filled, dissatisfied, mentally ill person. But maybe some of us are somewhere, or a lot of us are somewhere along that spectrum, right? Not in complete obsession and mental illness, but somewhere along that line. And I have felt it for sure, you know. I've never been an online hater. I mean, I've never gone, in all these years, I've never gone under someone else's video or just written something horrible. Just haven't. I consider that a really weird thing to do. You know, I've written positive things or something like that, or sometimes I've just not looked at it again, but I've not gone, oh, I hate your gut. Like, it's not a healthy thing to do. But there's an obsession, like, in the arts and the practices that I've felt, you know, and certainly at different times. And for me, when I was inspired by teachers that were very, very much better than me, when I met my current teacher, he was like so much better than me. I was like, all right, better try harder. And there was an obsessiveness that arose. And I'd felt that obsessiveness when I was younger, when I met other teachers, you know. So there was like an inspiration, almost competitiveness in a way. Oh, no, it's not true. That wasn't competitive. People would probably read it as that. I felt less worth. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I felt less worthy because this person that I met was doing these things I love to such a high level that their skill somehow reflected on me being less, having less value as a practitioner or a person. I think that's what it was. So then that creates a kind of drive. I guess that's a form of competitiveness, isn't it? But it's not, I don't want to beat them. Interesting. But it created that kind of obsession. And I remember, like, I would then pile myself into the practice, hours and hours, grinding away, grinding away, grinding away. Oh, I've got to do press, got to do jump, whatever. And it created this dissatisfaction. And at different times, it created that kind of grumpiness, you know. So then the practice stopped being something I loved and became something I flagellated myself with. I must do hours and hours of this thing, or I'll never be good enough. I'll never master this art, you know. And that self-flagellatory approach to the art that I think, if we're honest, a lot of us have had at different times. You might be hearing this and go, Damo's a nutter. Look inside. If you're a long-time practitioner, I bet you've probably done similar things. No, I know lots of people who have. And that driving and that flagellating yourself with the practice, driving, obsessing, creates the feeling of a chore almost with the practice. It's something I have to grind away at. And the problem with that is it makes you grumpy. And I remember, like, you know, I've taught for years, and so much time so much of my life I'm on stage in front of people. It's crazy. Stage because I'm short. Stage not because I feel I want to be center of attention, because every motherfucker's taller than me. Everyone's got taller. When I started teaching, I was like taller than or the same height as everyone. Now everybody's up here. I'm a midget. I don't know what happened. Everybody put more hormones in the food or something. I'm a short guy. So I'm on stage all the time so people can see. So I'm on stage like this, and I'm teaching hours and hours and hours. I'm always teaching. I'm always going to be there. I'm training or I'm teaching. I'm training or I'm teaching. And unfortunately, I've had to teach sometimes while I'm going through that process of the striving. And it creates like an anger or an angst in me. And I've recognized periods of my time in the past where I've had to teach with gritted teeth. It's like I'm so pissed off with the flagellatory nature of this training and trying to be nice, but it doesn't always work. And, you know, there's been times when I've snapped at people or been grumpy or something when I'm teaching, which I don't like, but that's the nature of it. You know, that's what happens from that obsession. And I've had periods of that, you know, where I've had periods of obsessively striving and then periods where I kind of chill out a bit for a few years and everything's a lot more pleasant, and then striving like this. And I think most martial artists, if they're honest, who've been in it a long time, if they're serious about what they do, have probably done the same. Maybe there's people that would say, no, I've always perfectly never strived, never been obsessive, but I think a lot of us have been somewhere down that spectrum to a certain extent. So I apologize to anyone I've been grumpy with while I'm teaching, and thank you to the longer-term students for putting up with me, but it's a part of it, I think. But for me, especially during COVID was send you a personal account. I apologize. I'll get back on topic in a minute. But COVID was a funny old time for me. Aside from anything that was going on, the politics, the lockdowns, whatever your thoughts, doesn't really matter. Like, well, it doesn't matter to this conversation. It's quite a big deal, really, but it doesn't matter to this. But for me, there was a lot of freedom because I was not teaching. And I traveled a lot during COVID. And I remember, because everyone was mentioning, you're a super spreader, you're killing people, and everyone was annoyed with me. But I was traveling around a lot. I traveled all through Indonesia, and I spent a lot of time in Bali, traveled through America a lot. Having a whale of a time, really. Like, maybe I shouldn't say that. Loads of people were suffering. I was just like, this is fantastic. The roads are empty, nature is empty, there's nothing around. As long as you hide from the authorities, you can stay out in nature. It was great. So it was a peaceful time. And I think about a month or two into my time away from people, I hadn't seen people very much, spent a lot of time on my own. Like, I felt this like release of striving. Like, the majority of it was gone. And I'm not saying fully gone, but it's okay, I have my Tai Chi and my Qigong for that. But certainly the obsessive side of it disappeared. The obsession went. And there was a liberation, and I'm not talking spiritual liberation, but there was a liberation, at least on the level of psyche, of my psychology, that freed it up. And all of a sudden, there was a joy that arose from the inside that reminded me of the joy I had when I first started. And COVID was a few years ago now, wasn't it? But certainly these last few years, I felt nothing but pleasure and joy at the practice that I'm doing because the obsessiveness is gone. And I haven't felt that obsessive drive in years now, you know. And it's funny that just letting go of that, which sounds like such an obvious thing when you say it, it is, but even if you intellectually know when obsessiveness needs to be let go of, or that drive, it doesn't matter because your intellect is not the thing that needs to let go, it's the other thing. It's the thing behind, it's the subconscious, it's the deeper nature that needs to release. And that can't be forced. You can't contrive it, you know. So sitting and let it go, and then this joy come back, and then all the self-flagellation of the practice disappeared. And all of a sudden, after all these years of training, the art expressed itself, and my skill level went whoop, like this, and jumped up a great deal with regards to, don't know why it made that noise. If you're listening, sorry, it went up. So you can't see my hand movements. So my skill level went up, but my skill level went up not because I was more obsessed or because I strived. My skill level went up because I just stopped striving and relaxed, and the obsessive side of my nature went. It went. I finally learned to relax. And I don't mean relax my body physically in the art, I was okay at that, but I finally learned to relax and not worry about what I was doing. And my skill level just went boom, the loss of striving just jumped it up. And I think anyone who's trained with me, and not saying my skill level is particularly high, I'm only comparing it to what I was. Anyone who's trained with me in the last 3 years, certainly the closer students who kind of know me longer would know that my skill level in the last few years has gone up. It's increased exponentially. And along with that, the joy that has come, and no grumpiness, no annoyance, that is all gone, that is all left. I live in a state of pleasure and artful expression when I'm doing the things. And then that has made the other side of it, the connection with spirit, much higher. So then when I sit, definitely still not claiming expertise, because that's a dangerous thing to do, because there's always somebody so good that you look like a total beginner, and there's always a bigger fish, you know. But compared to what I was, like, the ability to just sit and release into spiritual connection is a lot higher, okay, a lot higher, so that things can come forth that are, to me, what I think are the most important part of the art, you know. And the funny thing is, like, for the last 3 years now, actually, yeah, just literally coming up to the end of year 3, I've been teaching a full-time martial arts school, right, with other teachers, thank God, because I can't do it all on my own, and they're exceptional. They help me, but I've been teaching pretty much every day in this full-time school, and then when the full-time school is shut, I'm doing summer retreats for the rest of the school. So I have been on the go for 3 years. Like, I have been on the go. You would not believe how much teaching I've done and how much time I've had to stand on stage in front of people in a boiling hot sauna as well in Bali, because our hall is hot and I'm not good in the heat. You know, you've got the people in there who are from warmer countries, the Australians and things in the class, they don't even notice. I'm in there like nearly dead along with the other British people, just soaked in sweat. So it's not a comfortable environment, and I've been tired a lot, physically just exhausted from all the work, you know, Tai Chi, Jingyi, wrestling, boxing, Qigong. We've done a lot, you know. I come back from the wrestling classes and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm 45. I can feel it from suplexing some guy 3 times my weight over my back or whatever. But despite all of that tiredness, I've loved every second of it, you know. And I can tell because, as stupid as it is, if you look at photos of me a few years ago, I look grumpy as fuck in every single photo. I look like I'm posing for one of those Victorian photos where they had to stand for 15 minutes and then you had to flash a gunpowder and everyone's in sort of button-up shirts like that. You don't smile in photos, which is still the case in China, actually. You don't smile in photos, apart from the girls. You know, you stand very solemnly. But in every photo in the last few years, I've just got a big beaming smile, just a big grin. And the main reason for that is because of the letting go of the obsessiveness is what generated this release of this joy that came from inside, that transformed it so that every time I'm doing my art, I'm just doing something I love. And this is really what I want to point at with regards to one of the near enemies to finding spiritual practice, right? Is the obsession prevents you, right? The obsession prevents you because obsession locks you into psychology. And then the most obsession will ever give you is a psychological experience, right? So then you will get things like, I hear angels, I hear voices, I see spirits, I see lights, I see colors, whatever. These are psychological manifestations because they are sense factory experience things. These are your sense factors. Whereas, and usually it comes with a great sense of anger and dissatisfaction. Whereas to train with joy and love and passion for your art, so I throw myself into it. So I'm still goal orientated. I want to become as good as I can at my art. You know, I want to be able to express myself fully through my Bagua or my Tai Chi or my Qigong or my music or my yoga or my dance or flower arranging. I guess the samurais managed it. Don't really understand how they did that. But if I can express myself fully through this art, you see my goal orientation is mixed in with a joy. My goal orientation side of my training, the striving, is mixed in with a pleasure, so that every single second I'm doing this is just a joy. And there's no obsession. I'm not trying to free myself from samsara, because if I live in a state of joy and pleasure at what I'm doing, what pain am I trying to free myself from? Nothing. So therefore I can just do my art. I can do hours and hours and hours from that mindset, you know. And the more I do it, the more you start to beam and the happier you become. Then, in the back burner, somewhere in the rear plate of your hob, you have your spiritual practice, which isn't a practice. It isn't a practice. You have your spiritual non-practice, if you like. So that then I've enjoyed my art, I've expressed myself, and then I just sit, or I lay, or I stand, or whatever I do, and I just breathe, and I just let go, and I just let the qualities be there, and it will either draw you into spirit or it will not. And the obsessed person will never find that. It's not possible, because obsession is the wrong mindset. Trust me, I tried for a really long time. So these things I'm saying might sound obvious or woolly. And maybe you don't want to hear this, because I know that a lot of people prefer me just to give them technical explanations, you know, to talk about this or the other. But to me, this is technical. Like, this is a mental quality or an approach to practice that makes the difference if you want your art to be a spiritual art. And again, only my experience and my opinion, and I've definitely fucked it up in the past. But from the place I'm at, I feel this is the most useful advice that I can give some people, the most useful guidance, so they don't have to go through that discomfort, so that you can go through 3 years of full-time training and it's just a pleasure and it's just a joy. And trust me, some of the students have been very difficult, especially some of the ones at the beginning that shouldn't really have been there, you know, like, not because I didn't want them there, but actually it wasn't really what they wanted. You know, they thought they wanted full-time martial art training, but they actually didn't. They needed something else. So it created like some discomfort in them. And in the past, I would have found those people difficult. But actually here, most of the time I laughed it off and just enjoyed it. And it was like fine. And those people were easy to deal with. And I had to advise them to go somewhere else. You know, it wasn't a problem. But that level of release into joy at what you do, despite how difficult students are, people are difficult, or how difficult being this tired is, or how difficult the arts are, that joy that arises from it only comes when you stop the obsession and you stop the striving, so that the pleasure comes back, and that's when your art explodes. And you know what? That's where the chi is, and that's where the qualities are that guide you into that sort of spiritual side of your training, shall I say. The rain's quite hard now, so hopefully you can still hear me. It's beautiful. I really like the rain in the tropics. And growing up in England, there's a smell when the rain comes in the tropics that I really like, that it's like going inside a greenhouse or a conservatory. But I'd only smelt it then in the UK when I grew up, because it's not a very tropical country. I used to love that smell of like the sort of damp, hot moisture in greenhouses. And part of the reason I love Southeast Asia, it sounds stupid, is I love that smell when the rain comes. So I'm going to go out there in a minute, take a good long sniff of the greenhouse smelling garden. So I'll conclude this as well by, I'll conclude it with one final thought, that, again, I'm aware that this is not everybody's favorite talk, not everybody's favorite kind of podcast I give. I know people really prefer it when I go technical and I'm like, this is what yin and yang means in this particular art and stuff like that, because it's instructionally useful. So I apologize, but this is what I want to talk about. But I also conclude it by saying, like, if you're going to approach the arts for spiritual purposes, which there's nothing wrong with that at all, don't make it all that you do. Don't make it all that you do, especially in like the kind of arts I teach, Tai Chi, Qigong, Bagua, Xingyi, not Xingyi. Xingyi would be a weird thing to choose to approach spiritual practice from. Nothing wrong with it, I guess, but it'd be a weird choice. But don't make it all that you do, because if you make your spiritual goal the only thing that is your goal, the very fact that it's very difficult, because to none strive is very hard, is going to create an obsession and a dissatisfaction. And I think a lot of people do that. So what you want to have is an interest in the spiritual, but almost an irrelevance to it as well. It's a hard mindset to get, where I understand that spiritual connection is very important to me and I'm quite passionate about it, but it's also in the background, because I know that if it's not in the background, if it's in the foreground, if it's not in the back burner, I'm going to strive for it, and that's going to lock me away from it. So actually I have to chuck it in the background and then find something else that becomes the focus, which my advice to the people I teach, for example, is to make your Tai Chi as beautiful an art as you possibly can, because Yang style Tai Chi is very, very intricate, more intricate than people give it credit for, and there's a lot of beauty that can be put there. Or to make your Qigong as effective as you can, or your Chinese medicine as complete as you can, and pile your effort into that art, not to escape samsara or to escape some suffering, but so you can experience the joy of just expressing yourself through this beautiful classical art and making your art as high as you can. And then have an awareness that somewhere in the background is spiritual potential. So that what happens is then you just sort of explore the spiritual through non-doing a little bit, and if it doesn't happen, you don't get frustrated because you've still got your art to do. And then what happens is, maybe eventually or with time or whatever, you sit and then you engage with a spiritual practice. The non-doing will give a rise to something, and it's something beautiful and something transformative, something that is beyond what every spiritual YouTuber will try to define it as. But it will be there, and you'll experience it. I shouldn't use the word experience. You whatever word I use is wrong, isn't it? But you will unify with the divine, if you like. You will achieve union to whatever degree, but only as a bonus, a byproduct of the other work that you're doing, you see. So you throw your goal-orientated practice in a non-obsessive fashion, in a joyful, non-self-flagellatory practice into the art, and then allow the spiritual side of it to arise through non-doing when the time is right. Okay? And that is my advice. And I will try to make sure I counter this by doing some more technical podcasts, because I know that's what people prefer. Thanks, guys.